And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Greetings, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Saturday, August 3rd, and this outlook will be for Sunday and Monday. But as we usually start out here with the sea ice on Saturday afternoon, and we find a lot of open water here through the lower Chukchi all along the northwest coastline of the Chukchi from just southwest of Utqiagvik down past Point Hope and through the Bering Strait. There is some ice, particularly offshore there of the Beaufort Sea between Utqiagvik and Kaktovik. There have even been a few icebergs that have drifted in from areas further north. But aside from that, we just expect a continuation of the slow summer melt-off. But we are going to see some much warmer temperatures along the Arctic coast here. Sunday into the early part of next week, there are going to be readings in the 60s and 70s, a warmer downslope southerly flow, so be ready for some the warmest weather of the summer season. And looking at what we have for weather systems, the ridge of high pressure here over the Gulf, this is the surface reflection, but there's a strong ridge in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere that's building along the eastern mainland Alcan border, and this ridge axis will shift over northwest Canada as we go through the early and middle part of next week. So this is going to keep the panhandle generally dry and warm. Same thing for areas of the eastern interior, especially along the Alcan border, but initially there'll be a push of much warmer air here for Sunday into Monday along areas of the North Slope and Arctic coast. We have another low coming out of the North Pacific with more moisture that'll enhance rainfall. Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula. In addition to the rain that's going to fall along the Seward Peninsula, there are high surf advisories along areas south of Point Hope, around Kivalina, north side of Kotzebue Sound, and then going along the Bering Strait on the west and south side of the Seward Peninsula, all along Norton Sound and the lower Yukon Delta, including St. Lawrence Island. High surf higher than normal as a result of these stronger southerly winds, especially at high tide. And looking for Sunday, we expect low pressure here in the northern Bering Sea, southerly flow ahead of it, keeping areas of moderate to locally heavy rain going. Flood watch for the interior here of the Seward Peninsula. It's going to begin to fling moisture up toward the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, and by Monday that moisture will be spreading gradually, slowly further northward along the Kenai Peninsula, especially the outer coast, and also back into the southwest interior. And again, this pattern eventually will spread more rain up into the central interior and into south central here by the time we get into Wednesday. Thursday will be another push of a wet system. So active weather continues across the western portion of the state, drier in the far east and panhandle. Winds on Sunday, when we're looking at the marine weather, look for northwest winds 15 to 20 knots for the inner channels. Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage down through Dixon entrance. We're looking at 3-4 foot waves. Warm temperatures, though some areas will be well into the 70s, maybe even flirting near 80. On the outer coast, as you get within 15 nautical miles of the shore, we're looking at 15 to 20 knot northwesterly winds with swells 4 to 6 feet, maybe as high as 7-8 feet off of Craig. For Monday, winds come down a bit. Look for the inner channels to have north-northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, waves running a couple of feet, even warmer temperatures, and northwest winds on the outer coast. Right around 15 knots outside of Gustavus off of Craig with swells 4 to 5 feet, and then more easterly winds Cape Suckling at 10 knots and swells 3 or 4 feet. Pretty quiet variable winds here across Prince William Sound and outside of Hinchinbrook entrance. Variable winds 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet. But notice as that system approaches up from the south and southwest, winds will be 25 knots out of the east there at the entrance of Cook Inlet with swells as high as 6 to 8 feet. For Monday, that changes further. We're looking at strongest winds, 40-knot easterly gales there just north of Kodiak Island into the entrance and lower Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay. Swells could be 8 to 10 feet. As we go up the inlet, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots on Monday. Variable winds still holding because of the influence of that ridge further east over Prince William Sound, with waves there just running a couple of feet. On Sunday, northeast winds to 30 knots there, Shelikof Strait on the west side of Kodiak Island. As we go down along the Alaska Peninsula, generally east-southeast winds right around 25 knots, swell 6 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side and generally running about 3 feet on the Bering side. And then on Monday, winds in the vicinity of Kodiak Island will be east-southeast 25 to 30 knots. And as we trail out down along the Alaska Peninsula, we'll see southeast winds 25 knots, 6-7 foot swells there just outside there of Chiknik. For the Bristol Bay down through the Cold Bay, look for east-southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves generally a couple of few feet. Across the eastern Aleutians on Sunday, winds will generally be out of the east, I should say southeast. Could be upwards of 20 to 25 knots around Dutch Harbor. As we get further west, though, those winds get a little more mixed. Come northwesterly 15 knots from Adak westward. And then on Monday, winds will generally be out of the west, 15 knots across the eastern half of the Aleutians. But once you get around in west of Adak, generally westerly winds at 20 knots. And along the west coast, strongest winds will be here within Kuskokwim Bay, running on up through as we get up here around Toland Strait, and then coming along just off the Yukon Delta and in the wider expanse here of Norton Sound. South winds to 30 knots with waves 6 feet or so, higher outwards of 8 to 10 feet around St. Matthew. And Monday, winds go more southeasterly, east-southeast winds, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay to 20 knots, waves 4 to 5 feet. For areas along the lower Yukon Delta and out here through Norton Sound, southeast winds to 20 knots with waves generally running around 4 feet. And then in the vicinity of the Pribilof Islands, more variable winds at 10 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet there. Strongest winds, though, will be located around St. Lawrence up through the Bering Strait. We're looking at 35-knot southerly gales with waves of 8 to 10 feet south of the Bering Strait on Sunday. Again, that potential for high surf. That's why the high surf advisory is in effect through Sunday afternoon. Generally, south winds through the lower Chukchi Sea to 30 knots. And as we come up, south winds continue 20, 25 knots, Utqiagvik, Prudhoe Bay, much warmer air coming down slope here along the north slope. So we're going to see warming temperatures along this region, 60s and even some 70s. And then for Monday, a continuation of southerly flow, downslope flow along the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots until you get to Utqiagvik, to Cape Lisburne, generally southerly flow 20 to 25 knots, and then southeast winds in the lower Chukchi Sea just before the Bering Strait at 20 to 25 knots with waves running around 5 feet in the lower Chukchi Sea, and then southeast winds 20 to 25 knots along the west side of the Seward Peninsula and the north side of St. Lawrence Island, with waves anywhere from about 5 to 7 feet.